Thank you, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome everyone here today. I am Melody Brown Berkins. I'm the director of the Institute of Arctic Studies in the John Sloan Dickey Center at Dartmouth. And we are here today to hear from one of our Fulbright Arctic Initiative visiting scholars. And the Fulbright Arctic Initiative has some of its home here at the Institute of Arctic Studies. Former director Ross Virginia was one of the first co-lead scholars of the inaugural Fulbright Arctic Initiative back in 2015. And I was very lucky to actually meet with that group up in Iqaluit in Nunavut, Canada, long ago. And it is such an incredibly special group of Fulbrighters who come together from all 8 Arctic nations and the indigenous populations of the Arctic to come together and think about the pressing issues facing the Arctic and work together in a collaborative Fulbright team, which is not always how it's done, both on their own research, but then these collaborative projects that are actually things that the Arctic Council and policymakers in the Arctic are listening to this knowledge coming from the Fulbright Arctic Initiative. And so we are incredibly lucky to have a Fulbright Arctic Initiative 3 scholar who chose to come here for her research, and that is Dr. Lil Rastad Bjorst, who will be speaking here today. Dr. Bjorst is an associate professor in Arctic Studies from Aalborg, and I think I'm going to say it correctly, Aalborg University, who leads and directs the Center for Innovation and Research in Culture and Living in the Arctic, or CERCLA. She also is a member of the Aalborg Arctic Coordination Board and the steering committee of a group that works on green transitions. She, as I mentioned, is one of 17 of Fulbright Arctic Initiative scholars that are meeting this year in their 3rd cohort. And she chose Dartmouth as her space to conduct her research or conduct some of her outreach after hearing high praise, and I loved it when you said this, hearing high praise about us from colleagues in both Denmark and Greenland. And she'll be talking a bit about her work in Greenland today. So her Fulbright scholarship, she told me that she really was looking at 3 distinct questions, and this research is part of those questions. The first one was, what are the critical links between climate change, new infrastructure, and local Arctic communities? She said she's looking at how could new approaches enhance the co-production of knowledge in Arctic climate change research. And what could be the coping strategies and climate policy recommendations for Greenland on its way to independence? These are incredibly big questions, and I've had so many great conversations with Lil. She and I, just as an aside, when she first got here, we had first a road trip, and we got to go to the UArctic General Assembly, the 2022 University of the Arctic Assembly in Maine, and we got to have lobster together, and we sat in many lectures together, and the road trip and getting to know a Fulbright Arctic scholar like that in the first few days of her being here on campus was absolutely precious and priceless, and I want to do it again. She also took some of her time to go back to Iceland and meet with the Fulbright Arctic Initiative group. They'd been on Zoom. It was finally time to meet them in person, and from the looks of it, they really bonded and had a very good first meeting. She stayed busy. She then went to Alaska, and we talked a little bit about some of the things. I'm actually from Alaska, and some of the things she'd see in Fairbanks, Alaska, but she went above and beyond the connections she'd first started to have and met actually some folks I know up in Alaska who took her on tours of the permafrost tunnels, which are connected to here, the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Lab. There's also one in Fairbanks, Alaska. She got a special tour of the permafrost lab with people I know. Very Arctic in many ways. The Arctic research community is vast and looking at these questions that are so challenging, yet we're also a small group that road trips together and meets each other in Fairbanks, Alaska, or in Reykjavik, Iceland. So Lil is doing all of these things. So Dr. Bjorst, see, I can't help myself, she's part of our family now, is doing all these things here at Dartmouth. And not only that, she's reached out to tons of colleagues on campus who are already benefiting from her expertise and her knowledge. I myself learned from her about a group in Greenland called Arctic Hub that I've already reached out to that helps researchers understand how to better engage with Greenlandic communities and learn the interests and the priorities of those communities for the future of research, to share knowledge and really understand the priorities of the people on the ground. And she's met with I'm sorry, well, one thing, she's met with some folks who are in this room, you may not see them, but she's just charmed our community. And I even heard that someone in this room may have had a special birthday celebration, a special landlord that involved ABBA music and a very nice cake. So this has been the true Fulbright experience for Dr. Rastad Bjorst. But ultimately, she brings to us 15 years of experience researching climate change in Greenland, as a scholar within the human and social sciences, as well as many, many years of experience in research management as a principal investigator and a work package leader, and as the head, as I mentioned, of various programs at Aalborg University in Denmark. So she's going to tell us today about her work that is so critical in this moment. It is the Greenland is at the heart of so many questions right now, critical issues of Arctic cooperation in science, in policy, in climate, in global energy transitions, and in sustainability. These all continue to challenge our global diplomacy, our global science and diplomacy. And with Greenland at the heart, she's going to tell us, I think, today, not only some of the research she's found, but also how we need to listen to the communities of the North, work closely with Greenland's representatives, a largely Inuit population, to better understand how we can be allies and partners in this research together. So it is my sincere pleasure to turn the podium over to Dr. Bjorst for her talk, Greenland's Green Transitions, How the Politics of Comparison Inform Arctic Futures. Thank you very much for choosing Dartmouth for your Fulbright visit, Lil, and we are much better for it, and as I said, you are coming back. We've already decided that, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Melody, and thank you for being such a wonderful host here at the Institute of Arctic Studies and at the Dickey Center. And of course, I would also like to say a thanks to my other host, Amy Lovecraft from Center for Arctic Policy Studies at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And of course to my family, who's been following me some of the way. Yeah, as it was introduced here, I will talk about green transition and Greenland's take on green transition. As Melody so nicely put it, I'm engaged in many ways in Arctic research and has been it for many years. What I will talk about today relates to a research project I'm part of called Imagine Independence, Greenland's Post-Colonial Politics of Comparison, and it's funded by the Danish Research Council. Apart from that, I'm also part of another climate project called FACE IT, which is a Horizon 2020 project where we work in a very interdisciplinary, and we also work with people from all over Europe, and looking into also with researchers from Greenland, looking into the climate changes in Greenland. And as Melody said, I'm also representing the Kingdom of Denmark in the Fulbright Arctic Initiative. And this is my fellow Fulbrighter, Peter Linde, who's also representing the Kingdom of Denmark. This is the project that I'm part of. And one of the questions that we are engaged in the Imagine POCO project is how the application, rejection, and forgetting of categories for comparison close up some futures and make others self-evident. So what we try to do in this project is to understand, and as we know, Greenland has often been compared with other countries, and what we were interested in was how do Greenland do these comparisons themselves, and why do they do it? And also, so not doing a comparative study as such, but actually studying the comparison itself as an object of study. Because these comparisons they will have political effect, and And because Greenland is a state information in a way, they do not come with a package of peers as such. What we can learn from this is also when we look at how Greenland would like to see themselves. They are not only thinking about Greenland as Arctic as such. There are many other comparisons going on. And when it comes to the green transition, this is what where we see a lot of these different comparisons to other countries. This is the research group, and each of us are focusing on various sectors or topics. As you can see, my topic is mining and extractive industries. And our focus is, of course, Greenland. So as part of this, I wanted to look into the green transition because it was mentioned so much, and also as part of a discussion about mining. Actually, mining in Greenland is often mentioned by, it's mentioned by both media and politicians as something that is really happening in Greenland. But if you zoom in and try to figure out what is actually going on, I would say that not a lot of things are going on. Greenland at the moment, there are only 2 active mines in Greenland, there are various plans for mines. And Greenland is very rich in minerals, and also minerals that could be relevant for the green transition. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, you could read in the Greenlandic newspaper that one of these mines, who mined for rubies, had a big deficit and could not pay the money they promised to the local community to cultural and social activities. It's part of the impact benefit agreement that you make with a community when you start a mine. So it's not really moving that fast as you would think when you follow the news and when you listen to the politicians. But that being said, there might be new possibilities with green transition and with the green technology. For this presentation, I will focus on, of course, minerals, but also the potential for hydropower. Because I'm not an engineer, my focus is to look and to study the argumentation for this. And I've seen a shift in the political discourse, and I will tell you a little bit about that. This study will use the politics of a comparison as an analytical lens to understand Greenland's role and priorities in the green transition, and try to ask to whom and what does Greenland compare itself in the process of finding a fitting model for future green transitions. In my former work, I was looking at the climate change debate in Greenland, and at that time, it was back in 2007 and 2008, Greenland was often mentioned as a messenger and a climate symbol, and the Danish politicians, they were using Greenland as a climate symbol. So in 2009, Denmark was a host of the COP15, and before the COP, the Danish Minister for Climate and Energy, she kind of used Greenland as a messenger, and she invited heads of state to come to Greenland and tell them about climate change. At that point, we were still discussing whether climate change was real, so I think we are somewhere else today. But that was part of the process leading up to COP15. In Denmark, after going to Greenland and seeing, what's going on, climate change is real, the delegations were often invited to go to Denmark, and Denmark kind of were presented as a showroom for green solutions. And this is one of the former political leaders in Denmark, and he told to Time magazine, the Prime Minister Anders Fogh, that we were trying to make Denmark a showroom and to show how you can reduce energy use and carbon emission and have economic growth at the same time. But while I was doing my studies in Greenland for my PhD, I realized that the discussions were quite different in Greenland, and also the priorities. All these events and inviting heads of states to Greenland, the Greenlandic politicians, they did not find themselves as part of the delegation. They didn't feel like included, and the Greenlandic priorities were not congruent with the Danish ones. So based on that, I wrote a small paper. I wrote my PhD, of course, but also I've been following the lack of Greenlandic policy, because at the moment and in the years after, climate change was not on the top of the agenda. So as of today, Greenland does not have a climate policy. It's not part of the Kyoto Protocol, it's not part of the Copenhagen Accord, it's not part of the Rio Convention, and it's not part of the Paris Agreement. Which I thought was rather interesting, Greenland being used as a climate symbol and a messenger, both by the media, by politicians, but also by scientists. So Greenland has been represented a lot through hard science, glaciology, climate, all kinds of climate science. As a place to go and identify and look at climate change. But I would say that what we need today is that we have a lot of, you could say, matter of facts about the climate, but we kind of need facts that matters, and also things that are maybe more specific to life in the Arctic and especially in Greenland. So maybe understand the social drivers, which can be more difficult to identify. But these social drivers are very important for shaping policy and also personal decisions. What I will show you here is a report that came out in 2017 that is about, that was launched by the Arctic Council, one of the working group. Adaptation action for changing Arctic, and what I like about this report is that the focus on action, because I think that's where we need to go now. The picture you see here is me in a Danish being interviewed by the Danish broadcasting TV station, and it was because a new study came out in 2019 that kind of illustrated that, or the message was that no matter what we do, basically, or even if you follow the decisions in the Paris Agreement, the Greenland ice cap will disappear at some point. And then the logic was, well, that will have societal implication. But the study was not really clear on what would be the societal implications. My point was, well, when we talk about how Arctic communities are impacted, it's quite different from life in Europe in that sense. Because in Europe we are told to eat less meat, but in Greenland, to eat meat is actually to eat the local food, and which are there and not flown in from far, far away. In Greenland, it's cold, so you might use more energy to heat up your house. The advice, drive less, is not really working in Greenland to that extent that the cities are not are not connected, so you cannot really drive from one city to the next. You will probably only be 10 kilometers going back and forth wherever you live. And also the difficult infrastructure in Greenland, because the towns are not connected. So it's if you would like to meet in the municipality, the people who are elected for the municipality, the city council, somebody will have to fly in from somewhere. Yeah, because the country is so big. And also that Greenland has a big wish to create new infrastructure and create what they call sustainability for Greenland, to create new sector of growth. At the moment in Greenland, the biggest export market, it is fish and seafood. But they would like to develop new industries, tourism, at that point also mining, and today, maybe export energy. So that was a little bit about the specific or the Greenlandic priorities, so to say. But maybe also explain why Greenland is not part of all these agreements about reduction and decarbonizing and so and so. Because in 2001, we saw a shift in this policy from not being part of all these global binding agreements to suddenly talking about green transition, because Greenland commands resources that could be of huge importance for the green transition, and also, but as I would say in the study, the planning needs to work also as a rhetorical activity, and many problem definitions promoted by great powers as part of the green transition involve resources that could be found in Greenland. So it's important to have that discussion about Greenland's minerals and how they should be explored or how they should be used, and also Greenland's energy. At the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland, the Greenlandic Minister for Housing, Infrastructure, Justice, Mineral and Gender Equality, Naja Nataliussen, she gave one of the keynote speeches, and she said, "We want to be known for our commitment to renewable resources and live up to our name, Greenland." So that was kind of a paradigm shift, you could say, or a discursive shift in Greenland, to having such an emphasis on mining and tourism and not committing to global standards, to all of a sudden wanting to live up to the name Greenland. And also before in 2001 there was a very 21 there was a very important election in Greenland, where the whole question about environment was on the table. And that was motivated by the discussions about the mining of Greenland's uranium. So for the first time in Greenlandic politics, we saw that environmental concern was kind of put up on the agenda, and also we saw a government who was led by mobilized by the Inuit Ataqatigiit political party, who wanted to focus on green transition and also how Greenland could be part of that. And in their coalition agreement, you can also read how they want to be part of a global society. Green transition is the center of attention for governments, organizations, businesses, but also in academia. We see that with the European Green Deal, and also a lot of the Arctic policies echo the agenda today. But there are competing versions and framing of what green transition, what it is, and what is to be transformed, and who should have the main responsibility for driving that change, and there seem to be not only one singular green transition, but multiple ones. So in a way, it's an empty signifier, and it's impossible to define, and it's subject to constant revisions. But being all of that, and being so difficult to define, makes it very political powerful. In this project, we found that was something that needed to be addressed. With the green transition, it seems like something needs to go, something needs to be transformed. We need to, whereas with the discussions about sustainability, it's all about sustaining something. But when it comes to green transition, it's about something needs to go. Meat, oil, flying, we need to transform, we need to build another kind of society. It's not only about sustaining something. So green transition seems to be a critique of status quo. My Norwegian colleagues, they have tried to define it, and this is one of their definitions. But if you try to kind of follow the concept or understanding or define it, it comes in a lot of different versions, and there are lots of different definitions of it. But the agenda that is presented in the Paris Agreement goals is that the world energy system must transform away from fossil fuels, and we see already this, you could say, competition, geopolitical competitions, but of course also affected by the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, the Middle East, a lot of things. And with all of that going on, there is a tendency to a kind of a new resource nationalism. So in a way, green transition and the future identity of the nation are therefore sometimes often linked, and a lot of countries are using green transition as a way to kind of brand their country. So you could say this is a new tendency that we see today, with the new global research pressure from Russia and the Middle East and other places. For this study, I've been focusing on Greenland's the presentations from Greenland at the COP26, where they announced that they would like to be part of the Paris Agreement. And this is part of the speech by the Greenlandic Prime Minister Muttebø Egede. And he told the audience that Greenland wanted to reduce CO2 emission and promote sustainable green transition, but also open up for investors. And he saw a lot of possibilities in that. Just a comment, he said that they would like to be part of the Paris Agreement. Then he went back to his government, who was like, okay, good idea, but we would like to see, first of all, we would like Greenland to formulate a climate strategy, We would like to see calculations on the consequences or impact of this on our local businesses. And then we would like to have an open discussion about the national target, the national goals for Greenland. So it's not like it will happen tomorrow, but it's not off the table yet, at least. So, but here he's saying hello to the Danish Prime Minister, and they look like really happy and about Greenland joining the Paris Agreement, but we are still waiting for that to happen. And what he told at the COP26 was that Greenland's ambitions, there were like 6 different ambitions. They wanted to join the Paris Agreement, stop oil and gas exploration, and they were developing a 10-year biodiversity strategy. There were plans for new hydropower plants and export of renewable energy, and start cooperation with national and international investors to develop who needed a large amount of cheap renewable energy to have like data centers or power to X conversion. He also showed this video. I've presented a couple of clips here. You can go and have a look at it yourself. It's on YouTube. About Greenland's ambition. Both, we see the climate is changing, but we also see a lot of possibilities for Greenland in that. In the kind of documents around Greenland becoming part of the Paris Agreement, it is stated that they see a possibility to get access to various climate-related funds. I assume it's either to, it could be to look at some of the capacity building actions there are mentioned in the Paris Agreement, and also maybe pinpoint to the national circumstances that Greenland can kind of point to that. And also how developed countries should take the lead in providing financial assistance to countries that are less developed and more vulnerable. This is one of the things where you could discuss whether Greenland can be defined as a developing country, with Greenland being a welfare society in many ways. But depending on how you define it, it could be relevant. Because with a little help, a little support, Greenland could develop even further when it comes to develop its energy potential. This is quotes from the Nukissiorfiit, the Greenlandic electricity company. And the CEO, he's telling, it's a Danish newspaper, but that he understands the Greenland ice cap as the world's biggest battery, because it can produce energy for the next 800 years if it continues to melt in the current rate, which we most of us expect. And he's saying that the world's hydropower potential is about to be fully exploited, but Greenland is one of the places where it's not, where there are lots of unused hydropower. So this is kind of the, and the Galistad Lund, the Minister for Agriculture, Self-Sufficiency and Energy and Environment, he was also at the COP. And he presented also some of the possibilities and how Greenland could be seen as attractive as a provider of clean, cheap energy. So this is also part of the presentation video, and And one of the things they also emphasize is that Greenland would like to be a carbon neutral society, and that will requires innovation, investment, and commitments. They also talk about Greenland as a place for carbon capture storage, which will, of course, needs energy, but also for that to be efficient, there needs to be local industries. So I suspect that the catch could be that you come to Greenland, start your factory, and Greenland can help you with the cheap energy and then help you with capturing your emissions and help you with that reduction. So yeah, but it takes a lot of upscaling for that to happen, and they see themselves while arguing for this, they often talk about Iceland and Iceland's use of hydropower, Iceland's knowledge about carbon capture storage. What was not mentioned at the COP26 was Greenland's minerals. But if you follow the debate about minerals in Greenland, and especially the rare earth minerals that can be very useful in creating new green technologies, the mining companies, they are also arguing for the mining in Greenland as a way to support green transition. This is a commercial from one of the mining companies. It's Greenland Energy, and they are developing the Kvanefjeld project, Goinasuit, and where there are rare earth minerals, but unfortunately also uranium. So, and we have also seen that with some of the other mining companies, that they kind of argue now for how the mining and the minerals can help new green technology, and in that they say that they see that that could be Greenland's role in this. Rare earth minerals are very needed. This is a quote from a report where the total consumption of rare earth has grown or doubled actually, and also with the current use of rare earth minerals that we need for all the technology we want to buy, we might already face challenges in just 10 years' time, in terms of not having enough. The thing about green transition and Greenland's rare earth elements, it does have a significant climate impact. We see a significant climate impact in the production of rare earth minerals, and also the whole recycling rate is very limited, and in the Kvanefjeld project, it also includes mining of uranium and thorium and a lot of waste related to that. So, just a minute, I want to go back to this. So with all of these things going on, hydropower, mining, carbon capture, a lot of other ideas for things to do in Greenland, it will probably double the CO2 emissions from Greenland. So green transition in Greenland could mean industrialization in Greenland, more industrialization in Greenland, and also more CO2 emissions from Greenland. Yeah. I could say a lot more about the Kvanefjord project, but there might be questions about that later on. The picture here is from I can say a bit more, from the hearing in Narsaq in South Greenland in February 2021, where there was a lot of public debate about the mining of especially Greenland's uranium. And just after that hearing, a couple of months after, there was an election in Greenland, and the new government decided to put a hold on this. And now there is like a struggle between the company and the government of Greenland in terms of if they can continue with the project. And I just read today that there are a refusal in hearing because the refusal is about that it contains too much uranium, more than 100 ppm. And the company, they have already said that there might be a lawsuit following this. Yeah. But a greener Greenland, if we should kind of look into that vision, kind of represent the imagined fullness of society that is you could say at the moment absent. So it kind of give a plan B to an alternative economy in the years to come, not only being exporter of fish and seafood, but also exporter of energy and maybe minerals and maybe other things. But also becoming attractive to companies who would like to settle in Greenland. And it speaks to a future in which Greenland is less financially dependent on Denmark, less dependent on fossil fuels, and has trade agreements all over the world. So that is kind of, when I listen to the Greenlandic politicians, that's where they would like to go. Because at the moment, Denmark, in a way, take up too much of the horizon. So they would like to get rid of that dependency and become more independent in the whereabouts. This paper is, I just submitted it to the Arctic Yearbook, so you can, if you want to know more and dig deeper into this politics of comparison, you can do that. I tried to, while analyzing the documents, the different reports, the COP26 presentations, to understand to whom and what does Greenland compare itself in the process of finding a fitting model for future green transition. And I saw that there were both old and new categories being presented. We all know, the category being indigenous, and for Greenland that can sometimes be useful to put forward, especially in the UN, where being an indigenous people kind of can be useful to get a voice in other forums than only being a part of the UN as part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Then the whole idea of being a developing country, as presented and in the Paris Agreement, would they like to kind of argue for that? And then being a Nordic country, and this is something that we see in the video. The Nordic is kind of often presented as something positive, whereas the being part of the Kingdom of Denmark is often kind of not mentioned that much, and sometimes it nearly copy-pasted out of the presentation. But Nordic, being part of the Nordic family with especially Norway, Norway has a lot of interesting projects that Greenland find inspiration. Then the whole, being a bit like Iceland is something that we see often mentioned. Greenland and Iceland just made an agreement on collaboration. There was a formal visit from Iceland to Greenland, so in the years to come there might be more cooperation with Iceland, and often in Greenland they say that, oh, we would like to develop a tourism industry like Iceland, we would like to have more hydropower like Iceland and stuff like that. Then of course I said, being Nordic, being a bit like Norway, and I think for a lot of countries we kind of envy how Norway handled out to make their resources, the wealth created by the resources available as a way to also lift the whole society as such and invest in the north with those money. Then a bit like Scotland, it's only mentioned because I think Scotland was kind of the host of the COP26. And that is often what happens in these political spheres when you meet, country to country. Oh, we could become friends. So what do we have in common? And then of course, when it comes to mining, Australia and Canada could be mentioned. But as I said in the beginning, some of these comparisons can be a bit off, and if you should follow that way of comparing, maybe you also need to look into what is overlooked. For Australia and Canada, both of these countries are dealing with processes of reconciliation with the indigenous peoples in their country. And we also see that very bad cases in terms of creating benefits for the local community. Maybe a good case in terms of looking only at the money, but when it comes to other things, there might be things that are not comparable. And of course, Australia and Canada are quite, big populations as well. And then, of course, the whole idea of becoming a climate-friendly green country, that is a general tendency for a lot of countries these years. Just being here in the US, I can also see how Biden, he's trying in various ways to talk about the US as a new green country, and how to decarbonize and all of that. So it's a general trend. But talking about green transition can also have this political effect. It can open up for future political identity discourses about what Greenland could be. and this inconvenient element can easily be overlooked, like post-colonialism, the very different demographics and size of country, national economy, environmental standard, and when you compare Greenland and Iceland, there are very different governance in these two countries. And it can enable empty gestures as part of and it makes it where as a researcher you sit back and think, well, what are they talking about when they say all of this about green transition? Because it's so vaguely defined. And sometimes green transition can offer a promise, but one that cannot be articulated directly, and therefore is not necessarily binding or committing. So that kind of opened the window or opened the door for mining companies to talk about themselves as green. Talking about green mining is a bit difficult in the sense that the mountain will not, come back. It's not a resource that might come back again or grow back again. But green transition can be for Greenland a new way of talking about environmental problems, where environmental management and transformation is seen as a positive sum game and not as a showstopper. I think for a lot of politicians, talking about climate change was a bit of a showstopper. It's like, stop doing this, stop doing that, or it's a terrible crisis. But talking about green transition kind of makes them really hopeful. We can talk about new technology, we can talk about growth, we can talk about how we would like to see ourselves in the future, what kind of life we would like to live. But for Greenland, green transition, as I would put it, would mean more industrialization and potentially more CO2 emissions. And green transition might alter life in local communities. They could. If new companies come in and start up. So it could also be socially transformative, both, in many ways. And it might not lead to independence, but rather to a more delicate distribution of independence, whereas you might not be so dependent on Denmark with the block grant and all of that, but there might be companies who work with Greenland who might have more employees than the country, than the citizens of Greenland itself. So, let me see. This last question was something that came up when we talked about the title of this presentation, and how can the politics of comparison inform Arctic futures? And I needed to think a little bit more about that. And also, so I think politics of comparison when it comes to green transition can be a way to talk about Greenland as a state information, and without Denmark. So like a real state with alliances and friends, and there are more and more of these kind of state-like visits to other countries, and also see Greenland as more than part of the Arctic, but also something else. And also the green transition can be seen as maybe a plan B towards how Greenland could develop, and And with this politics of comparison, learning from other countries, it could help to prevent like a green resource curse, and look towards other countries and learn, are there better ways of doing this or that? It could be the politics of comparison and the green transition could be a way to develop new products to export with new partners. And I think in Greenland, from what I understood, they also hope that this could create new jobs, more taxes, royalties from the mining sector, and I think the politics of comparison give a possibility for Greenland to be imagined as an Arctic community in international politics, but of course, as I said, some elements will be overlooked in that process. So that was kind of some of my thoughts on that. And yesterday I had a very good conversation with a colleague here who worked with ice and climate, and he said, well, the Greenland is melting, and yeah, we all kind of know that, but and then I said, well, the Greenland ice cap is melting. Greenland has never been so solid as now in terms of developing as a country. And this is also something that you can read out of the latest IPCC report, focusing, there's a specific chapter focusing on the polar regions, that a way to adapt to climate change is actually to seek self-determination, development, and become more independent in terms of having the chance to engage yourself in the political decisions about this. And also, well, the ice cap is melting, but that could also give some opportunities for Greenland. But of course, we should also, of course, acknowledge that people who live from the land, who live from hunting and fishing will definitely be very much affected by climate change. Yeah, so this is what I prepared. And there are possibilities for asking questions. And there's a bit of references if you'd like to read more. So this is my last slide. This is some of my colleagues in Denmark. I miss them a lot. And actually also some colleagues from Greenland. This is from the Greenland Science Week last year.
Thank you so much. And I know Anne Hansen is in there.
Yeah.
So I was just mentioning, I do see one of Fulbright Arctic, first Fulbright Arctic, Anne Merrill Hansen there as your colleague, and I think one of the ways we're all connected, so it's wonderful to see her there at Greenland Science Week. Thank you so much. I have so many notes, and I'm also trying to keep an eye on the any questions coming in. I think I see one there, but I'm going to take the prerogative of asking first and also checking if anyone in the room has a question. But my very first question for you, I'm not going to hold. I'm going to go right to it. So I think in one of your very first slides, the total number of citizens in Greenland, you showed Greenland was the size of a huge part of Europe. I mean, of Eastern Europe, and dwarfed so many other countries. And then you had the population, and that again is it about 57,000 people, which is, that's to me, you had it in one of your slides. One of the biggest challenges here is to try to do this in massive rethinking and having such a, it's challenging to have such a small population who is also out fishing and sustaining and raising families. And so one of my questions too, I'll try to do just one, but one of them was, how does that work in terms of communication in Greenland when there is sort of a political we want to take a little bit of Iceland, just this is the imagination of the future that you're wonderfully presenting to us. If there was an imagination by the premier and others in leadership, let's take a little bit of Iceland and a little bit of Norway and this roadmap potential to where we, maybe a little bit of Norway, then how does that go from the government centers, even though it's only 57,000 people, it's a huge country, a huge island.
Yeah.
How does that work there? I'm just actually fascinated how that might, does it work? Or does it, do the communities really don't want to hear about that and want to just focus on what they're doing? Or is there a communication structure so that all of Greenland could be part of that kind of future together?
I think there are various things going on in Greenland at the moment. I think talking about desirable futures, you know, what would you like to be in the future? That's something most people would like to attend. Like, but in Greenland, there are also this whole process of decolonization and kind of going back and you know, thinking about old traditions and kind of revisiting the Inuit culture. So I think most people expect that that will be, you know, the foundation, and then a lot of new things coming up. So I don't know if that will answer your question, but I don't see these two things as, you know, in opposition, because I think most people in Greenland would like to see the private sector growing and see new possibilities for jobs and stuff like that.
Well, actually...
And a lot of the young people, they educate themselves
yeah.
to take some of these new jobs. Yeah.
Well, perfect, because one of the questions that comes in says, you know, you spoke about there's the science of, we know there's the natural and physical science of the ice melting, and then you were talking really about these social sciences of comparison of politics, of governance. But the question is, so in these futures, and what might be the role of, you were kind of getting there, of arts and sciences, of the arts and humanities and the role of youth in this future imagining and future of Greenland? I think you were just answering it, but really that arts, humanities, culture, and youth engagement, is that something that is part of this politics of, in the comparison, can that be part of it, and how might it be?
Oh, that's a really big question.
It is.
I think when you are about to build a nation, of course, you know, the nationalism is maybe not a good word for it, but kind of talk about, you know, who are we and how do we see ourselves and what is it to be Greenlandic. Of course, that is important, because most people think about Greenland as a people and as a country and you know, who is maybe not a state, but a country in itself with its own kind of language and culture and tradition. So that will always be important. And the other part of, I think that will, and that is also part of the new possibilities that we see, that you know, maybe and also young people, they learn languages. I mean, they might not work in the future in a workplace where everyone will speak Danish or, I mean, but also they do understand the necessity for learning a lot of different languages and not only one. I don't know if that answers your questions, but...
Well, it does, because it actually transitions to another question that just came in. So there's this is I think a theme that is being built on is, first of all, wonderful presentation and incredible contribution to Fulbright Arctic. This is someone we may know together. That the transitions you've been describing really focus on economic and political, or on the economy and political influence and again, sort of in Nuuk and the government. How do you see from your work and work with smaller communities, how do you see those communities sharing in this national transition economically and sustaining the values they hold is important. What have you seen how communities are trying to do that in this sense of rapid change so far?
Yeah. I think it's an evolving process. And as I said, with mining and some of the other things, we have talked about it for years and years, but it's still not really happening. So not a lot of people work in the mining industry as it is. So it will be, an evolving process, something that will happen as we go. But I think it's necessary to educate people with more knowledge about, the engineering, technical side of things in terms of being part of the green transition, if and when and how, whatever it would happen, to understand the possibilities there and yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult question, but I think it's an important conversation, and I think it's still, Greenland still needs to decide on a climate policy, on national goals, on a lot of things and are unclear, but the ideas are out there.
Well, this is another kind of a building you just mentioned
Yeah.
on that. The choices, you said a bit of Iceland, a bit of Alaska.
Yeah.
When you went to Alaska,
Yeah.
just from your own, did you see that maybe there could be a bit of Alaska? You mentioned the I'm going to say it incorrectly, Kvanfjeld project. And I know you were thinking about some of that. What is the mining situation in Alaska and the different engagements? But is there a potential, because in many of your lists, the United States as a whole wasn't there, but the pieces of Alaska and that sort of North American Arctic, was there a connection there that at least in the few days you were in Fairbanks and Alaska, what did you see there?
So what Greenland could learn from Alaska?
Oh, and then you were there, I think, specifically around some mining issues and those projects.
Yeah, I think Alaska present a lot of examples of how maybe things should not be done in terms of supporting local communities and engaging in local communities. But in Alaska, you will also find projects where they've been really good at engaging, local people and local stakeholders. So of course it's very diverse. But I hope that because Greenland has its own governance structure and laws, and so that they can be smarter in a way where the local community will benefit more from all of these possibilities. And that is a delicate process, and we also see that with the mining companies. They're used to navigate in a place where a lot of basic infrastructure might not be there. So this is what they offer. We can build a swimming pool, we can build a road, we can give you a hospital and stuff like that. But in Greenland, it's not like they need a hospital; they need other stuff. And there is kind of so what is an impact and what is a benefit? It's very specific to what kind of country you would navigate in.
Thank you. Yeah, and which, again, to the point of working with, if there is research to be done, making sure we connect with the Greenlandic.
Yeah. But I truly hope that Greenland will gain more as a country from its resources than what we see in Alaska.
Okay.
I really hope that.
More of the Norway model, as you mentioned.
And become less, yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to tell you that I'm already seeing this presentation is really a perspective, and again with Greenland partners that we were talking with. I think this is going to spark so many different conversations, and it's already sparked many conversations with us and with some colleagues around campus in really recognizing this work for Greenland to go to that they've been doing for so long, that the self-determination and independence is also is part of this future of green transition. And watching their choices and what will happen is going to be absolutely fascinating. And it's just going to put a whole new thinking on our work, just as you did with your colleague on the ice climate. It's not just melting, it's actually in one of the strongest positions it's ever been. That's really fascinating. So thank you for that perspective and for all of the ideas. Thank you, everyone here, and we'll talk more. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.